Goodbye. Hello, Heisman.
20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50, 45. There goes Davis. Oh my God! Davis is going to run it all the way back. Auburn's going to win the football game.
They give it back now to the 30. They're down to the 20. All the band is out on the field. He's going to go into the end zone.
Four-man Alabama rush. Got him. Oh, no, they didn't. Oh, my gracious.
Yep.
How about that?
Well, Trey, we predicted a weekend full of really good football. And you know what? I think we got as close to delivering that as we possibly could. We had the Peach Bowl, that was a banger. The Sugar Bowl, delayed by a day. I thought that was really pretty solid, pretty entertaining football overall. And you know what? I found Penn State and Boise State to be a pretty decent watch, all things considered. Did the score get away from Boise State at the end? Yes, absolutely. But I found it to be remarkably entertaining. The only game that really didn't deliver was the one that we were promising was going to be an absolute banger. As we welcome you into the Three Technique, college football podcast at the intersection of the X's and O's and the Jimmies and the Joes. Trey Reeves and myself, Mitch Mason, were reacting to the quarterfinals here late on a Thursday night. Trey, just run with it. Initial takeaways from this weekend. Were you satisfied? Were you left wanting more? Where you fall here?
Well, first of all, just want to start by saying our hearts and thoughts and prayers go out to all the people affected by just that senseless act of terrorism in New Orleans that caused us to have to push the Sugar Bowl back and push our show back. Obviously, those things are very secondary to what happened. So our thoughts and prayers are with everybody affected by that. And we hope that they get to the bottom of that and justice is served and, that God's will be done and all that. But from a football perspective, man, I saw a tweet that I really wish I could give credit to because I can't remember who wrote it right now. But basically it was saying that everybody that's clamoring for good games also feels like people that just only think good games are decided in the last possible second, like the Peach Bowl. And if you think that, then you're going to be dissatisfied watching the sport 99.9% of the time, because very rarely do we actually get those instant classic games. That's why they're instant classics. And I loved watching every single game this weekend for different reasons. They were all good games. They were all very competitive, other than the Rose Bowl into the fourth quarter. And game that we thought was lost in the Peach Bowl all of a sudden flipped on its head extremely quickly. Boise State hung around and made it a game for a while. Georgia found a way to stay somewhat competitive when it looked like they were completely down and out at the start of the second half today. So all in all, a great 2 days of football. I have no complaints whatsoever. And even the Rose Bowl, which we thought was going to be a banger, ended up being a blowout. It was very interesting in its own right to see an Ohio State team just utterly dominate the only undefeated team in the entire sport all season long. That's fascinating. So great 2 days of football. No complaints from me.
Yeah, I agree. We were trying to figure out where to start on this recap. Do we do it chronologically? Do we do it reverse? Sugar Bowl just got finished up. What are people going to want to hear? But ultimately, Trey, we decided we have to start with the Peach Bowl. That was the instant classic that we were anticipating, at least coming from one of these matchups this weekend. Ironically, maybe the game that the nation counted out the most, right? With Arizona State. And we told you on the preview show, mathematically, this did not favor Arizona State. There was not a single metric that you could point to and go, yeah, I think the Sun Devils have the edge here. Rushing attack, Texas's defense. Pass rush, Texas's defense. Aerial attack, Arizona State didn't have any wide receivers with more than 20 catches coming into this game. I mean, there was nothing that was going the way of the Sun Devils, and there was nothing going the way of the Sun Devils early. Texas jumps out to a big lead, and then here comes Sparky, and he claws his way back. Cam Scattaboo, 42 yards passing and a touchdown, 143 yards rushing and 2 touchdowns, 99 yards receiving. He gets the Peach Bowl MVP. If you're listening to the podcast, if you're watching it on the YouTube side, Cam Scattaboo made the thumbnail, and I think we felt like there was no better place to start than an ode to Cam Scatterbo for putting a team on his back and willing his team into double overtime against the Texas Longhorns, who, I mean, we can get into it, man. I really felt like they got outplayed by the Sun Devils.
Yeah, I mean, we can get into a lot of different things about this game, but credit Arizona State for fighting back. It really looked like they were dead when Quinn Ewers ran that touchdown in. I think that made it 24-8. Time and time again in the first half and really halfway through the third quarter, they could not finish off drives. Really the same story as Boise State the night before them. They were getting into striking distance, couldn't finish off drives. And I know it was frustrating watching them. I know it was frustrating to their players and fans. We saw Cam Scatterbo reacting very negatively on the sideline as well, to just for some reason, people still thought that you could go right up the middle on the Texas defense. And then they eventually got more creative in the offensive play calling. It paid off in spades with that big 4th and 7, I think, touchdown pass from Cam Scatterbo. Ended up being a bomb touchdown, and it was off to the races from there. But really, I think if you're a Texas fan, and obviously if you're new to the show, you see my banner in the background and you know that I'm not a Texas fan, and I'm going to come from this in a little biased take, but are you more breathing a sigh of relief or just extremely nervous about your next round matchup coming out of that? Obviously, you're going to celebrate a big victory in the quarterfinals. Moving on to the semifinals any way that you can is nothing to scoff at. But if I'm a Texas fan, everything that people have been saying about the holes in the resume, the holes in the roster, kind of came to fruition on New Year's Day. And it's very concerning for me from the outside looking in, going into a matchup against Ohio State next week. If you want to talk about just actual national title contenders.
Yeah, I think, boy, and next week is a reckoning for me in the Cotton Bowl, because you're going to have Ohio State, who's my preseason pick to win the national championship, taking on Texas, who I reversed course after the Michigan loss and said, I don't know if Ohio State has that dog in them. I think Texas might have that dog in them. Now, the one thing I came away from after the Arizona State game is wondering if Texas has the killer instinct to go beat an Ohio State, to then go beat Penn State, Notre Dame, whoever it is that they line up from across, if they're able to get through the Cotton Bowl, because this game could have been over so early. This could have been over by halftime for the Longhorns if their offense would have just stepped on the jugular of Sam Leavitt, of Cam Scatterbo, and completely taken a comeback off of the table. And instead, we saw play calling get conservative for Texas. We saw the defense start to have some holes that eventually the battering ram that is Cam Scatterbo started to break against that fortress that Texas's front seven is. And for as much hell as Sam Leavitt was put through trying to dodge edge rushers, and man, that kid, I would love to see the GPS data from Sam Leavitt, because that man ran a marathon in the backfield trying to get away from Colin Simmons and Anthony Hill and all the edge rushers from the Longhorns. All of that, I mean, you watched at least the first half of the game, and it felt like Texas should be up 30-0. And yet they weren't.
Can I cut you off real quick, Mitch? Because
Sure.
I think I want to get your take on this. Is that more of a player limitation? Is it more of a play calling limitation from Steve Sarkisian? Because you're absolutely right on the step on your throat. They don't seem to have that. They played with their food all season long.
Yeah.
What's your take on that? Is it a player thing? Is it a scheme thing? Is it a play calling thing? Is it all the above?
I think I don't know that I could point to one thing in particular. I think in this game, it was their inability to run the football. You were texting us over and over through this game, like, Sark, why aren't you running the football? Texas ran for 53 yards. Quintavian Reisner, 18 carries for 45 yards. That's 2.5 yards per carry. And you look at that in the box score, and it would be very easy to go, well, duh, that's why they weren't running the ball. They weren't getting anywhere. But the opportunity for Texas to run the ball absolutely was there, and they just never committed to it. Those 18 carries from Trey Wisner, it felt like were sprinkled all throughout the game when Texas needed to bleed the clock and just could have iced the game late. They're throwing the ball. They're going with low percentage throws. They had a 4th down, Trey, where they threw a quick out route over the head of a corner in press man coverage. Like, I did feel like there were holes in the play calling against this Arizona State team. And eventually it felt like Texas had so many misses that Arizona State started to believe. And you heard the broadcast talk about it. Oh, momentum's a real thing in college football. Here come the Sun Devils. And slowly, not only was Arizona State starting to believe that they could win, Trey, they were the better football team. They were playing better football than the Texas Longhorns for almost the entirety of that second half. And, I know we sit here a day later and you look at the wreckage and go, yeah, okay, 39-31, Texas found a way to survive. But I am very concerned about the Longhorns going into the Cotton Bowl, especially given the Rose Bowl, which we'll talk about in just a minute. I mean, I don't know how you can be pumped if you're Texas about the matchup going forward, given what we saw against Arizona State.
We're excited it's in Dallas, and I think the excitement probably ends there. But yeah, the offense for Texas has been so perplexing all year. And I think part of me thinks that they're going to put Arch Manning in next year and just really be kicking themselves, thinking, what the heck were we doing this entire year? Because look, Quinn Ewers is a fine quarterback. He's not a national championship level quarterback. And they have a national championship level defense. They have a national championship level offensive line. They have playmakers of the receiver that are borderline national championship level. I hate to pin it all on one kid. You know that we don't like to do that on this show, but it's really hard not to. And at times this year, it seems like Sark has been wanting to prove the doubters wrong with Quinn Ewers almost. I know that's not what he's doing, so that don't come at me like I know that that's not what he's doing. But the play calling almost seems like he wants to prove people wrong and let Quinn have his moment. And it's to the detriment of the team. They're coming out of the 2-minute timeout. Like you mentioned, Mitch, they need to bleed the clock. I know Auburn missed 2 field goals down the stretch, but
brutal.
The reason Arizona State even had a chance at the end of regulation to take the lead and steal the game was because coming out of the 2-minute timeout, Sark called 3 passing plays in a row, and it was 2 incompletions and a Quinn Ewers scramble that Arizona State immediately called a timeout on. I think they burned like 10 seconds, 15 seconds off the clock coming out of the 2-minute timeout. And it gave Arizona State an opportunity. We can talk about the targeting no call here in just a second, but
yeah,
it was just mind boggling, man. And Arizona State for their right had a few, what the heck are we doing moments too. I mentioned the running straight up the middle on 4th downs, the 4th down calls in the first half and the third quarter were just really questionable. And then the cover 0 blitz in overtime when they had him 4th and 13 was, man, just of all the times to make that call and for all the times for a safety to get lost in the moment, that they just picked the wrong time to do it. And it cost them the game ultimately. But it's a game that Texas had no business going to double overtime in, especially after the start that they got. But when you think about the offense as a whole, they got a punt return touchdown in the first quarter. They scored on 2 plays on their first drive. After those 2 plays, it was tough sledding the entire time. And it was largely because of miscues from the quarterback position and a lot of questionable play calling and not trying to establish the run.
Well, in Texas, after they scored on 2 plays, like you mentioned, 2 passing plays, congrats. Punt return touchdown from Silas Bolden. It looks like we're off to the races. Texas doesn't score again until 5 seconds left in the game? As far as they don't get back into the end zone, no.
Right, yeah,
they kicked a field goal in the second quarter, but they don't get back into the end zone until the 4th and 13. And Kenny Dillingham.
Well, they scored. Quinn ran the touchdown in to give him 24 points, and that made it 24-8 at that point. I think that was midway through the 4th quarter.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah.
Yes, you're right. The 4th and 13's in overtime. You're right. The Dillingham was kind of kicking himself at the podium. And, a lot of people were asking, okay, walk us through that coverage there. Cause it's 4th in the season, 4th in the semifinals, and you run a jailhouse blitz. And he said that Ewers checked at the line of scrimmage when they tipped their hand, the Sun Devils did, that they were coming, and the coaching staff just couldn't relay an audible of their own in time. My only thought with that is, okay, great. If you're going to bring 8, then why, it's going to 2. Everybody in the stadium knew that Quinn Ewers was going to throw it to Matthew Golden. So my thought is, if you're willing to go man on man, let's bring 7 and double 2. Put 2 guys over the top, 1 at the line of scrimmage. Let's jam him and put 1 over the top to prevent exactly what happened. Golden gets off the press and the safety doesn't back up. He gets caught with his eyes in the backfield. Touchdown, Texas.
And it looks, there was a lot of confusion on that play because it looked like they wanted to bring 8 and then 3 guys kind of halfway rushed. So they didn't get home. And it was a 1 read pass. Quinn
that was the season.
1 read and he hit the read and the rest is history. But yeah, it was a crazy game. And as a neutral fan, I'm so glad we were blessed with that Peach Bowl. I was not expecting it to be. I got up in the middle. I needed to do some dishes. And when it was 24-8, I started doing some dishes and had the TV on loud. And thankfully, Joe Tess was very emphatic about calling the Sun Devils to come back. So
he was on one, man.
He was the perfect announcer for that game. If we can't have Gus Johnson, since it's an ESPN property, like we got to have Joe Tess for a game like that. I'm so thankful.
I agree. So final score aside, a lot of the dialogue coming out of this game centers around the targeting call or the no targeting call. Arizona State's driving to win the game. If they get this targeting call on 4th and 8 or something like that, it's a first down. They are well inside field goal range now. Arizona State, as the broadcast kept letting us know, an adventure in special teams. They were 4 of 12 coming in on field goals past 30 yards. So it was by no means a given. Now their field goal kicker had hit 2 from like 36 and 39, I want to say, or at least he did over the course of the game. So all of that aside, though, the dialogue from the game centered around, was the hit from Michael Taff targeting as it's written in the rule? And I'll set the stage with this. I was sent from multiple different parties the exact same rule saying, yes, it is targeting, here's why, and no, it's not targeting. And both parties highlighted the same part of the rule. So for me, in the moment, I thought it was targeting. I thought there was forcible contact to the head. I don't know if you could say he launched in slow motion. It didn't look like he launched. Live, it sure looked like he did. But what I kept coming back to is we've seen that called targeting all year long. Just about every single time you get that kind of hit, it's called targeting. And so whether or not I actually believe it should have been flagged, I thought it was in the moment. My issue is we have no national standard for officiating. If you have very, very smart football people, brilliant football brains sending me the exact same underlined part of the rule saying, yes, it is targeting and no, it's not targeting, we have a problem, Houston. And so for me, my whole takeaway was the fact that we don't have any sort of standard, any sort of oversight committee. Officials are not held accountable whatsoever. As I've mentioned all year long, with the money and the politics that have infiltrated college sports, that run college sports, we are rife for an absolute scandal that would break the sport. And there's another example of it where all of a sudden, if you have an official who's improperly motivated, you see how those calls very literally determine the outcome of a game.
Absolutely. Yeah, I couldn't said it better myself. And before the Texas fans get really up in arms of us focusing on just that one call, that was the biggest call in the biggest moment of the game. But they're a laundry list of bad calls from that officiating crew. It was not a clinic on New Year's Day. So, I mean, you're absolutely right on the targeting, though. It's such an impactful call from it being 15 yards and an ejection that it has to be correct. And we have to have an actual standard. I don't know what the solution is. I mean, the big picture solution is getting rid of conference officials that prioritize different things and having nationalized officiating. But if we're going to make targeting such a big deal, every targeting review needs to go to the same person. Or 3 people, and they need to sit in a room all day that there's college football and say, yep, we're the targeting board and it's 3 votes or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah.
Like the end of the dodgeball movie, maybe where it's a thumbs up or a thumbs down, but I don't know, because it's such a big part of our game and it's so inconsistently called that it just is going to drive everybody away from the sport. It's ruining football games. And the fact that we even have the opportunity to talk about how there might be nefarious motivations or that the wrong team might be moving on in this situation, the biggest weekend of the year up to this point, it's just ridiculous that we have so much money in this sport and we can't get this right.
Agreed. And to be clear, we're not saying that this Big Ten officiating crew had anything improper with the game. We're not even saying that the wrong team won this game and moved on. What we are saying is there is a problem. That is Exhibit A, Your Honor, of why there's a problem in this game. And it did very realistically impact Arizona State's ability to close that game out. I mean, those are just the facts, whether you like them or not. Texas obviously got it done. Arizona State had multiple opportunities to win that game after that targeting call or the no targeting call, and Texas found a way. So congratulations to Texas. I'm excited to break down the Longhorn-Ohio State matchup on our preview show. That'll be later this week. I do think it's going to be a good matchup. But as we roll maybe now into the Rose Bowl game.
Well, can I say one more thing on the targeting real quick?
Yeah.
The last thing is there were some brain dead people with big national accounts saying things like it may be targeting, but you don't call targeting in that moment.
That was wild.
That is the most brain dead take. I've seen a lot of brain dead takes this season. We've talked about a lot of them on this podcast. That might be the most brain dead take I've seen this season or since we've started this podcast. If it's targeting, it's targeting. Doesn't matter if it's in the first quarter or if there's zeros on the clock and it gives an untimed down. Like we saw, what game was it? Was it the Michigan TCU playoff game where there were people talking that there should have been a targeting call at the end of that game on TCU?
Oh,
that
sure.
Extended one more play. If it's targeting, then it's targeting, right? Like that is just the most asinine thing I've seen in the college football space in a long time.
Yeah, you're telling me that you would prefer subjectivity in the rule book. Like that makes actually no sense. Less than 0 cents. Truly amazing what some people will stake their reputation to on the old Bird app. Rose Bowl. Should we get into it now?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, let's go to Pasadena. Trey, again, out of all the games that we had on the slate for this weekend, we promised you one thing. We promised you that the Rose Bowl usually gives us bangers, and we expected nothing less from the Buckeyes and the Ducks. 34, nothing? That was what Ohio State raced out to. Yeah. And then Oregon manages to get a sympathy touchdown and 2-point conversion at the very end of the half to kind of get the juices flowing. And I'm like, you know what? Maybe if TCU could do it in the Alamo Bowl down 31, then darn it, so too can the Ducks. It felt like the Ducks were completely outclassed in this game. I tweeted out a picture of King Felix celebrating his perfect game. The caption, Will Howard and Chip Kelly right now. They put together and executed the perfect game plan for the moment. They had Oregon secondary in knots. Jeremiah Smith, who everybody in the building knows the ball is going to, is seen running wide open. Nobody within a zip code of him. And it's because of the way that Chip Kelly orchestrated this offense. When I just kind of looked at the totality of the game and tried to think what was my big takeaway, it was two things. It was one, the offensive line for Ohio State stood up. Everybody talked about how this Oregon pass rush is going to get after the patchwork offensive line for the Buckeyes. And Ohio State said, absolutely not. And Chip Kelly is in his bag. Once again, validating his move to go away from the head coach of UCLA. He was the head football coach at UCLA. And he said, no, I'm done with that. I want to coach ball. I'm going to go be an OC and I'm going to win a national championship. And now it feels like Ohio State is not only able to do that once again, it feels like the faith in the Buckeyes has been restored. When I look at these four teams left, I think there's no doubt Ohio State should be the favorite to hoist the national championship trophy on the 20th.
Absolutely. Yeah. If they're not, I don't have the odds in front of me. If they're not the favorite, I would be shocked. Yeah. I mean, we talk about quarterbacks seeing ghosts all the time with coverages and blitz packages and things like that. The entire Oregon defense and the defensive staff was seeing ghosts with what Chip Kelly was pulling out in that first half because he could do no wrong. And it's really easy to say Yeah, he has the best wide receivers and he has a competent quarterback, but it's just perplexing to me how long stretches we went this entire season where the Ohio State offense didn't look like this. At this point, we got to think that they were sandbagging, right? And that they knew they were going to win the games with their defense and they pulled out a bag of tricks in the playoffs. It really feels that way at this point, but it's just a completely different team. There's no other way to say it. This is the Ohio State team that we all expected to see at the beginning of the year, and we were questioning where they were for long stretches of the season. Not just the Michigan game. I'll give you the Nebraska game. I'll give you several other their Big Ten matchups where they were just struggling to put the ball in the end zone and struggling to throw the ball downfield. But whether it was sandbagging or whether it was just a come to Jesus meeting after the Michigan game with that coaching staff, it is a completely different vibe in that building right now. And they're feeling themselves. They are feeling the confidence, and it's contagious on both sides of the ball. People are going to talk about the offense putting up 34 points in the first half, or rightfully so, but holding that Oregon offense to just 8 points in the first half. And really, it was a garbage time touchdown in the first half, for as weird as that sounds to say.
Right.
For all intents and purposes, they shut them out in the first half until it was garbage time. And that's equally impressive to me. That defense showed up as well, and I don't want that to get overshadowed by the offense.
No doubt. I mean, the defense was airtight. Oregon couldn't do anything.
They had negative yards through the first quarter, didn't they? I think it was until
something like that,
the second quarter that they got to either positive or double-digit yards.
Well, and Ohio State scores real fast to start this game, right? The Peach Bowl is not even over. This is on ESPN2 when Jeremiah Smith runs in that first touchdown for the Buckeyes. If you were an Oregon fan, you didn't miss anything by watching the end of the Peach Bowl, because Oregon just started going 3 and out to start this game. They're going backwards, as you mentioned. The secondary for the Buckeyes was elite. They picked on Denzel Burke in that first game in Autzen. That was not the case in Pasadena. I was so impressed with the way that the pass rush for Ohio State was able to get home, and they had Dylan Gabriel in absolute knots all night long. I mean, it really was kind of the reverse, where when Ohio State was not going well, it was their offensive line. And, you make the joke that maybe they were sandbagging. I think the offensive line just figured it out. I think they just figured out how to play, because they're not only able to give Will Howard
together. They needed time in that setup, and absolutely.
They were not only able to give Will Howard a clean pocket to throw for 319 yards and 3 touchdowns. They ran the ball, Trey. They had not done that very effectively against stout defensive lines all season long, but they got 181 yards in this game. Both Travion Henderson and Quinshaw Judkins had success. Henderson goes for 11.8 a carry and 2 touchdowns. Quinshaw Judkins, a very workmanlike 5 yards a carry. I mean, they were a balanced offense. To look at the stats afterwards and see Will Howard only threw 26 passes, and furthermore, he just completed 17 of them. In real time, it felt like it was an air raid against Oregon, and every single pass was 20, 25 yards down the field. And then you look at the box score and you go, no, you know what? That was an incredibly balanced attack. It gives further credence to Oregon had no idea what was coming. On a play-by-play basis, the Ducks had no idea what was going to be called. And I think that's all credit to Chip Kelly and the execution of this offensive staff.
Do you think there was a rust factor at all? I don't want to make excuses for Oregon, but we did highlight that in the preview show. Do you think there was a rust factor at all for the Ducks, and Ohio State playing a first-round game, it actually benefited them a little bit more?
I think that's a good question. I mean, the fact is all 4 teams that had the bye lost. All 4 of them.
You can point to reasons for 3 of the 4. I would say Oregon is the one that you can't really justify through injuries or just being out talented. But
no, and Oregon was the one team that really needed the break too. I mean, they had just gone through a gauntlet of 8 straight conference opponents. They were the only team in the country, I believe, that had to play 8 straight conference games. And as we highlighted in the preview show, it wasn't exactly a cakewalk. The fact that we weren't talking about Oregon on a weekly basis was due to the fact that they were just taking care of business, that there wasn't a trap game effect until they got to Wisconsin. And, obviously we're able to get out of Camp Randall that way. But that team was banged up. They had gone through a long conference schedule. I actually wondered if after we recorded that preview, you know what? I wonder if that bye is going to help them, just have them healthy and ready to go. But the fact is, all 4 home teams, all 4 higher seeds did lose. We were making the joke in our group chat. I saw some people put it out on Twitter that, who's going to say now that Oregon doesn't belong after they're getting waxed? The fact was, this was the most complete team on paper in the country. They had taken care of business every way they had turned. They had won their conference championship. They had earned the top seed and that bye. And sure, they got unlucky as all get out to get the Buckeyes in the second round, right, in the quarterfinals. That could have been a national championship match, and we would have been very, very happy with that. Mm-hmm. And the idea that we need to reseed and adjust the model, we're going to talk about all of that in the offseason. I think it's very glaringly obvious that there are tweaks to the format that must be made to award and reward teams like Oregon who should not be playing the Buckeyes in their first matchup of the postseason, right? But I do think there is something to that time off, that you lose the momentum, you get out of a rhythm. And I hearken back to the MLB. This has happened before in Major League Baseball, where the home teams, the higher seeds, get just washed by a team that found momentum, that got hot. And suddenly a team like the 2023 Texas Rangers, that went into the postseason dead on arrival, get hot, figure it out in Tampa, and roll through the postseason and go undefeated on the road. Like, that's sports, folks. That's why we play this silly game on the gridiron, not just on paper. So, long-winded way to say, I think there's probably something to it. I'm not going to blame the loss on the rust, but I do think there's something to it.
Yeah, and it'll be really interesting over the next 3, 4, 5 years to study that too, right? Because 4 games is not a good enough sample size, especially with the, like I mentioned, the obvious shortcomings of Georgia not having a starting quarterback, Boise State and Arizona State being in matchups that really didn't favor them, even though Arizona State played well, like we mentioned. But yeah, I mean, and it'll be interesting to see too. There's already murmurs that the seeding will be messed with next year, and we're already seeing reports that they're looking at that. So it'll be really, really cool to track that over the next 4 or 5 years to see how often that does, and if coaches start to adjust their strategy late in the season too. If it really does seem like, hey, that rust is a factor, do coaches start to try to position themselves a little bit better going into the postseason to play that first round game if it does seem to be a disadvantage?
We talked about Texas struggling in the running game, how that really needs to be a factor for them to seemingly open up the playbook. Ohio State held Oregon to total negative 23 yards rushing. Running backs for the Oregon Ducks collected just 21 yards. Dylan Gabriel lost 43 yards on 8 sacks. The Buckeyes also had 13 tackles for loss. I mean, this was a destruction of the highest order. And I think you just have to tip your cap to the Buckeyes. I think Oregon just ran into the best team in the country when fully operational, and they went Death Star mode on the Ducks.
2 weeks in a row, too. This is following up the Tennessee performance with a great performance. If I'm Texas, I'm doing whatever I can to show up in maize and blue next week and just hoping that it works, because that seems to be the only strategy that can stop Ohio State right now.
That's Ryan Day's kryptonite. All right, 2 down, 2 to go. We've got the Fiesta Bowl and the Sugar Bowl. I'll turn it over to you. Which way do you want to go here?
Let's start with the Sugar Bowl. Fresh on the mind, 23-10 final for Notre Dame. I'll start with this, Mitch. I thought Gunnar Stockton played really well.
I did too.
For the position that he was thrown into, there were some really bad busts on the offensive line that hurt him, that caused a couple of fumbles. There were some really bad drops from the receivers, like there have been all season long, that stalled drives and made it much more difficult on him. But overall, he was not the reason they lost today.
No, definitely not. I mean, you mentioned it. The offensive line was a turnstile at left tackle. It didn't matter who was coming off the edge. I know RJ Oben forced, I think, the first strip sack there late in the second quarter that then allowed Notre Dame to throw a touchdown pass. but Stockton was running for his life. I'll tell you this, I love the way that Stockton throws the ball. He throws fastballs over the top, man, like he's pitching off a mound. And I think he's a lot of fun to watch. He's got the dual threat mobility to him. I sat there going, I know Georgia's not scoring points right now, but how on earth was Stockton riding the bench over Carson Beck, especially when Stockton seemed to handle pressure much more than Carson Beck ever did. ESPN showed a graphic of Carson, which, I mean, boy, he was catching some strays. He wasn't even in this game. One of the worst quarterbacks in the country when it came to throwing under pressure. Stockton stood in there and took some hits under the chin. I thought he played like a champ today, despite the offense only putting up 10 points.
Yeah, but the story was that Notre Dame defense, just like last week against Indiana, just completely, it felt like at halftime, it was a 10-point lead, and I texted that it felt like a 30-point lead. Yeah. Because the odds that Notre Dame defense, the way that they were playing, was going to allow Georgia to sustain enough drives and sustain enough time of possession, frankly, to get back into that game. I know it was close going into the fourth quarter, but it really felt like an insurmountable lead at halftime, the way that defense was playing. Again, not so much the offense. I thought Gunnar Stockton was fine, but the defense was really forcing the issue. And that matchup with Penn State might be another relatively low-scoring game in the semifinal with Penn State. I'm really interested to see how those two defenses match up again. But yeah, I mean, it was a defensive struggle like we highlighted that it probably would be. I don't think Georgia's defense played bad either. You had the short field after the strip sack. You had the opening kickoff of the second half return for a touchdown. That's 14 points right there that could flip the game the other way. The defense played well enough to win, but yeah, just a combination of the Notre Dame defensive line and secondary being absolutely elite, not giving a lot of cushion like we said that they wouldn't, and inexperienced quarterback trying his best, but coming up just a little bit short. And it played out pretty much exactly like we thought it might.
Yeah. I think that's a good segue into my next question for you. Grade Notre Dame's offense. They have less than 250 total yards. Riley Leonard throws for 90 yards, 3.8 in average pass. They run for 154. Again, Riley Leonard, student body left, student body right. I mean, it was a lot of quarterback power. So I have a theory on this, but first I want to kind of hear your honest assessment of Notre Dame's offense. Again, given the fact that they just won the Sugar Bowl, but put it in context of, can they win a national championship doing that?
I think they can get to the national championship doing that. I don't know that if it's Ohio State on the other side, that's going to be that's kind of the ultimate trump card right now with the way that Ohio State's offense is playing. You're going to have to find a way to keep up with that. But I mean, it's hard to really fault them because they just kind of did what they needed to do in this game. It reminded me a lot of the Texas A&M game at the beginning of the season, where they looked across the other side and said, hey, that guy's probably not going to beat us. Talking about Connor Wegman in the first week, and talking about Gunnar Stockton and just the whole offensive unit of Georgia. Offensive line, receivers dropping the ball at all. Let's just not give them an opportunity to beat us by playing recklessly, right? That was kind of the strategy for Notre Dame. It was kind of just take care of the football, move down the field, get into field goal range, put some points on the board when we can, and that'll be enough in this game. And credit Marcus Freeman for taking advantage of that and not trying to force the issue. It's really tempting when you're in a defensive struggle like that. When your defense is playing really well, you want that big play. You want the backbreaker. You want the pull-ahead play. But a lot of times just sustaining a long drive, keeping the ball away from the other offense and keeping your defense off the field is really the way to go in that. And finishing drives with 3 points was more than okay today. They knew that, and they didn't have to force the issue. So you asked for a grade. I guess I'd give them – they won the game, so I'd give them somewhere between a C+ and a B-. It wasn't pretty, but it didn't have to be today. They just kind of did what they needed to do.
I thought – I agree. I think on its face, fine. Given the context, passing grade. Good job. You did exactly what you needed to do. I thought where the edge came in, Trey, was honestly the coach wearing the headset. I thought Marcus Freeman outcoached Kirby Smart in this game.
Yeah.
The fourth down fire drill was brilliant. I mean, brilliant. And I've had my doubts about Marcus Freeman. I mean, of course, going back to last year, the last couple of years, so many questions about, is Freeman the guy? Is he more than just a player's coach who, yeah, the players like him, but when it comes to the championship, when it comes to winning a big game, 10 men on the field against Ohio State, we lost to Marshall, we lost to Northern Illinois. He won me over with that fourth down fire drill and just the orchestration of the game plan, because he knew what his team needed to do to knock off the kings of college football. I mean, Kirby Smart is the king of college football, right? Georgia is the standard in today's college football. And he beat them at their own game. His defense was more physical and smothering than the Bulldogs. His offense was able to grind out yards and find those extra inches more so than Georgia was. I mean, Jordan Faison, man, it's fun to hear how he's a dual sport athlete and a national championship lacrosse player. That guy's just a winner. Mm-hmm. Watching him fight for extra yardage, and even if he didn't get the first down, boy, he was making it close. It was going to be 4th and inches instead of 3rd and 4. I had a buddy texting me who was pulling for Georgia, and he's like, we just cannot stop Faison. Every single 3rd down, it's going to Jordan, and he's going to get right to the line, if not past it, right? It was that kind of day for Georgia. I was just so impressed with Freeman and the job that he and his staff did. It felt like they got everything to go right, and yet I didn't feel like this was a fluke for Notre Dame. I felt like, nope, this is the team, this is the culture that he's built.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And that fire drill was the perfect low risk, high reward situation. If Georgia doesn't jump off sides there, they probably don't snap the ball. And they just eat the timeout, or they burn the timeout, or take the 5-yard penalty and just punt. And it's fine because they're up at that point. Perfect low risk, high reward situation with that in my mind. Couldn't have said it better myself. I've been really impressed with Marcus Freeman these last 2 weeks, having his team ready. I joked with you in a text earlier that if he lost to Indiana, if he would have found a way to lose to Indiana, there might have been some really unhappy people up in South Bend. But he's got him in the semifinals. He's got Notre Dame with the best chance to win a national championship in my lifetime. I know they made the BCS championship against Bama 10, 15 years ago, but we all knew going into that game that there wasn't really a fighting chance in that one. Yeah. So I think this is the best chance Notre Dame's had to win a title in my lifetime. And I think that's a huge win for Marcus Freeman and a really exciting moment in the program to be where they are right now and have the reinforcements coming on the way, because he's doing a great job on the recruiting trail as well.
Well, he is. And, I think 2 things, and we can move on to the Fiesta Bowl. I think number one, I think if Notre Dame is able to win a national championship, I think it's going to be a fascinating study in the trends of college football. Like, does this reset college football to, you don't have to throw for 400 yards to win big games, right? You don't have to have the Maseratis and the Ferraris out wide to win a national championship. You can just win it with defense and good fundamental football. I mean, we've been saying defense is going to win a championship this year. All 4 teams that are left play excellent defense. And I would go so far as to say all 4 of these teams hang their hat on a championship caliber defense. So that's going to be my main takeaway, I think, from whoever hoists the national championship. But if Notre Dame,
you took the words right out of my mouth, man. Like it is, all 4 of these teams are defense first teams. It's weird to say that with Ohio State because of the Maseratis that they do have on the offensive side of the football, but they are defense first teams and they're all in the semifinals.
Yeah. Yeah. You look at the math and that's the elite side of the ball, if you will. So yeah, if Notre Dame is able to get it done with another, 244-yard offensive output, we're going to have some fascinating discussions about the state of college football and what wins. And as you mentioned, they're doing a great job recruiting. We were talking about Notre Dame quarterback room going forward this year. Fascinating offseason discussions, I think, coming up.
Speaking of offseason, real quick. What is your temperature on Georgia? heading into the offseason as a program? Ooh. That might be a way too big question for right now, 45 minutes into a recap show, and that's okay. But 3 losses this year, didn't lose to a bad team by any stretch of the imagination, but reloading at quarterback, always going to be losing a lot of talent on the defensive side of the ball that they have to figure out how to replace. Temperature check.
Not great. Not great. I think the shine might have worn off Georgia just a little bit. And I'll kind of leave it at that. I think there are a lot of cracks in this foundation. I think whether you want to point at the coaching staff, the culture, the recruiting, I think there are some cracks. I think there are some misses in Athens right now. And I know that's not what Dog fans want to hear. I'm not rooting against Georgia, but boy, watching that team this year, some missed evaluations, some missed coaching hires. I don't think anybody thinks that Mike Bobo was the right move. There's some issues in Athens that Kirby now gets to actually play the rat poison card. There are people that will doubt Georgia all off season long. And when they go 15 or 16-0 next year, whatever, congrats. I mean, we played right into your hand, but yes, there are some issues there.
They did do a lot of work in the transfer portal already in the receiving core. So that's big. They're also rumored to be in on Noah Thomas from Texas A&M. So that would be another big addition for them if they can land him. Yeah, I know. But anyways, this isn't an A&M podcast. But you got to start with the offensive coordinator for me. Mike Bobo needs to be gone yesterday, and got to find someone that can better utilize the talent that they have. I know that there were a lot of execution issues this year. The drops, the missed blocks, it was not pretty, but somebody that can just own that side of the football and let Kirby cook on the defense would do wonders, just like Monken did. Monken was fantastic at that, and that's why Stetson Bennett was who he was for Georgia. It was a lot of scheme and maximizing the talent that he did have with the scheme.
Yeah. Well, you talk about maximizing talent, and I know they lost, but gosh darn it, Boise State's season, I think, is going to go down as one of the more special seasons in college football history, at least to me. We get to watch one of the most special players in college football history, Ashton Jeanty, run all over the place. Penn State wins 31-14, not to bury the lead, not to take the shine off of the Nittany Lions win. James Franklin beats a top 10 team. He wins a game in a big moment on the road across country. I mean, there were a lot of things going against Penn State, right? I feel like a lot of the country was rooting against Penn State because they wanted to see James Franklin fail and Boise State succeed. And I think this game was closer than the final score. Penn State ultimately pulls away late. They score the only touchdown in the fourth quarter. They got out to the fast start, 14-0. And you and I talked about that in the pregame show. Boise could not allow Penn State to strike first. Certainly not twice. Once they got down 14-0, it started to feel like it might be getting late early with as fierce as that Penn State defense was. But all of that to say, I let off the show with it. I still had a good time watching this game. I thought it was a competitive match. I loved how hard Boise played. Coming in here to this Fiesta Bowl, they hadn't lost in Glendale. They were 4-0, 3-0, 4-0 in Fiesta Bowls. So, I mean, this was the Boise State Bowl. This was their home field. And Penn State was able to come in and say, nope, we're the better team and we're going to control this. I was really impressed with what I saw from Penn State, but I still thoroughly was able to enjoy and celebrate, I think, what Boise State put on the field as well.
Penn State had a few too many athletes in the end. And just like we talked about in the preview show, I wasn't worried about Boise State between the 20s, between the 30s as much, but once they got into scoring position, it just really fell off for them. They missed a couple field goals, had the 3 second half interceptions from Maddox Madsen, and Ashton Jeanty was contained for the most part once he got inside the 20s. And that's when the Penn State defense really tightens up. That's when an athletic advantage really becomes apparent. You can scheme open some big plays in between the 20s, but once you get in that red zone and in that scoring position, it gets really difficult when you're outmanned and out athleted. So Yeah, but credit to Boise State for their season, credit for hanging tough, and credit for making it a game. It was in doubt going into the fourth quarter. And I think for most college football fans, that was more than enough. Obviously, there were some whiners that said, just looked at the final score, and there's the meme of, oh, I'm going to just look at box scores and argue with people on the internet. But I was really impressed with Boise State. Penn State, on the other hand, to talk about who won the game, do we feel like they have enough going for them that we actually count them as a national championship contender? Are you treating them as a semifinal participant or someone who actually has? Can you paint the picture, I guess, of a Penn State national championship at this point?
Oh, I think I'm with you. Getting them to the national championship, just like you could get Notre Dame to the national championship. I think in my mind, there's a world where I see the Fighting Irish hoisting a national championship trophy. I don't know that I could say the same for Penn State. And I don't really have a great reason why necessarily, but I just don't know that they have the pizzazz. I don't know that they have the it factor, right? They've got great
what's
defense.
The thing that they're going to do that another team, a Notre Dame, a Texas, and Ohio State just can't counter? I can't answer that question.
You know, and it was funny because I was having a discussion with a family friend who just asked me, knew I did a college football show and said, do you watch that Drew Aller kid? Like, what do you think of him? And, the box score, it's a Drew Aller box score. It's 13 of 25 for 171 and 3 touchdowns. His QBR was at 44.9. Like, the stats did not like Drew Aller. And yet, when I watch him play, like, I see all the intangibles of an NFL quarterback. He's got pocket presence. He's got a strong arm. He's got a high football IQ. He does a lot of the little things the right way. It just doesn't seem to manifest itself in big time numbers, right? And I know they've got Tyler Warren, who 63 catches and 2 touchdowns. Like, he was a nightmare for Boise State trying to defend. That was a real issue, especially late. They don't have the wide receiver core. I think that's going to be able to separate and really make these secondaries, whoever they end up playing, whether, if they were to get through Notre Dame, they don't have a wide receiver core that's going to hurt Ohio State or Texas. So then you've got to look at the ground game, and they've got a good ground game, a good offensive line. They've got Allen and Singleton that, they ran for 216 yards as a team. But can you beat Texas or beat Ohio State just running the football? Like, I don't know if you can. So they're the one team in this field. I'm not going to say they don't belong, but they
had the easiest path to get here by far.
They did.
And I think they're the hardest picture to paint of actually being someone that you could see hoisting the trophy on January 20th.
Yeah, I'll agree with that. Again, all credit to James Franklin for, it doesn't matter who they've had to play, they've gotten here, right? The narrative coming in was it doesn't matter who that team is, as long as they've got a certain little number next to their name, Franklin can't win it. And he's proven them wrong, obviously, by beating SMU and by beating Boise State here. I do think it's going to be different against Notre Dame. I think you're going to have to see that offensive line be special. And I think you're going to have to see Tyler Warren blocking a lot more. I know they've got another blocking tight end who kind of plays second fiddle to Warren. But the way that I saw Notre Dame get after the passer today against Georgia, I mean, they were coming from all over. That was one of the keys that I put in our Sugar Bowl snapshot over on Twitter. Shameless plug to follow us at 3TechPod. Notre Dame had to mix up the defensive looks because as shaky as Georgia had been, you can't just line up 4, line up 5 and consistently get to the quarterback. Georgia's got enough competency at wide receiver to create some separation. And you saw that with Arian Smith a couple times today. You saw that with Oscar Delp a couple times today. But what I thought Al Golden did so well was he brought pressure from all different kinds of places. There were stunts, there were loops, there were tricks up the middle. And that offensive line looked lost facing the Fighting Irish. And so I think if Penn State's offensive line is going to learn anything from this week, you had better be buttoned up front. Because if Aller doesn't have time to pass, if they can't establish running lanes, it may still be a defensive rock fight, but Penn State's going to get suffocated out of the Orange Bowl.
And yeah, and if the offense is clicking as well for Notre Dame, I think I trust their offense a little bit more at this point than a Penn State offense that's done fine and put up points, but it's kind of been because their defense has set them up a lot of times. So at least the first 2 rounds. So should be a good game. I'm really excited to see that Orange Bowl game between Notre Dame and Penn State. But yeah, I really have a hard time painting the picture. I could maybe get Penn State to the national championship game, but I have a really hard time seeing them overcoming Ohio State or Texas. We've seen them against Ohio State for a decade now, James Franklin. So I guess selfishly, I might be rooting for Notre Dame in the Orange Bowl to give us a little bit more novelty in that championship matchup.
Sure. I agree with that. Just to close the book on Ashton Jeanty, you mentioned box score folks arguing on Twitter. The amount of people that said that, well, Ashton Jeanty finally played a big boy defensive line and look at the numbers. He got stuffed. To that crowd, I say you were at a New Year's Eve party.
They're
say
probably
you were drunk
drinking
at the bar.
Yep.
You were not watching that game. Ashton Jeanty forced 16 missed tackles against a top 5 rushing defense in the country, a team that is known for their front 7, that has a proud tradition with linebackers and tackling. He forced 16 missed tackles in a single game, Trey. By the other side of the card, Nicholas Singleton, who's been the more effective runner, I believe, over Katron Allen, he's forced 23 missed tackles all season. Jeanty almost got there in a single game. Ashton Jeanty is one of the most special players we've ever seen in college football. For folks to be still hating on him, on Cam Scattaboo, just at the expense and to say, no, this validates Travis Hunter, I'm at a loss for words. I really am. I don't think you understand what you're watching. And furthermore, I think, it's just the internet culture where, well, if I'm going to support one person, it means I have to tear down somebody else. Why can't we just enjoy excellent play in college football? Like, why can't we just say, you know what? Travis Hunter, Ashton Jeanty, Cam Scattaboo, all existing in the same year. I mean, what a treat. What an absolute treat that we as the viewers got. But the Jeanty slander has not been tolerated on this show all year long. His career, incredibly special for him to stay at Boise State. I'm so proud of that kid, from a local kid here from North Texas, Frisco Lone Star. And he's going to be a really good running back in the NFL.
Absolutely. Can't wait to have him on a fantasy team or 2 next year. It's going to be really fun to stash him away, maybe get him. But you're absolutely right. There is a crowd, and there always will be a crowd. This is not me tooting my own horn. I am wrong way more often than I am correct.
We're wrong so much.
And that's why I celebrate when I'm correct, because it doesn't happen very often. But have the humility, or at least don't pretend like you know what you're watching if you're going to say those things about Ashton Jeanty, because we're all just kind of pointing and laughing at you at this point, and the joke is really on you. So if you enjoy that, if you enjoy just being a troll, that's fine. Like, there are those people in the world that just really love that, but we are laughing at you, not with you, just so you know.
I think that's well put. Last thing before we get out of here: Texas and Ohio State in the Cotton Bowl, Notre Dame, Penn State in the Orange Bowl. Rank those 4 teams for me. Power rank them in as far as likelihood of winning a national championship.
Ohio State's number 1, and it's a pretty big gap to number 2 for me.
Okay.
Just from what I've seen on the field in the playoff, I would put Notre Dame number 2 and then Texas number 3. I think those are pretty interchangeable, though. If we're just going by eyeball test in the playoff, Ohio State is by far and away number 1. I would put Notre Dame 2nd, Texas 3rd, and then Penn State a pretty distant 4th. But I do think I think both games will be pretty good next week, and I think we'll have some competitive games into the second half. But I'm more concerned about Texas and what they've looked like in the playoff keeping up with Ohio State than I am Penn State and Notre Dame keeping up with each other.
I think I'm with you. I think Texas could absolutely beat Notre Dame, and they could beat them by multiple scores, given how thin Notre Dame's secondary is. But it would require you throwing the football down the field, which in my mind for Texas has to be set up by the ground game. And Notre Dame, without Riley Mills, mind you, their best defensive tackle, their Mr. All Everything on the defensive line, out for the rest of the year with a knee injury. And they stuffed Georgia time and time again, and they got pass pressure. That's what concerns me about Texas playing Notre Dame. And so I'm with you. I think they're very interchangeable. I would lean Texas based on my gut instinct. I just feel like still somewhere this Texas team is built to win a national championship. But I'm with you. I think it's a coin toss between the Longhorns and the Fighting Irish. So, we'd love to know what your thought is. If you've stuck around here to the end of the show, give us your power rankings. You can tweet us, write us on Instagram, email at 3techpod or 3techpod@gmail.com, in the YouTube comments as well. We would invite all of that discussion. But Trey, any last thoughts here before we get out of here?
Excited for the semis. Really excited. I think it will be 2 games. Looked up the odds here. It's Ohio State -6. I think that opened at about 3.5 or 4.5. It's
I believe you're right.
6. And Notre Dame's a 1.5 favorite against Penn State. So really excited about both of those games. I think it's going to be really excited to dive into them. I'll save any predictions or talk about them for the prediction show, but really excited for those 2 games. And I think we'll have a pretty decent national championship matchup too out of that.
I agree. It'll be whichever team wins the national championship. I believe it will be the first team. It's what am I looking for here? I think 2014 is the last time one of these teams won a national championship, which was Ohio State in the first year of the playoff. 2 of the teams didn't even win a BCS national championship. So it's some newcomers to this stage, at least teams that we haven't had on this stage in nearly a decade, which is fun. Kind of cool not to have the same old. I know there's a lot of people that are saying, the SEC is dead. I think that's a discussion that we'll have on another podcast going into the offseason. I think there's some real validity around the SEC being overhyped, overestimated this year. And it's either, I've tweeted this a couple of times, it's either a changing of the guard, I think, where the Big Ten kind of rises to prominence, or it's a heck of a backdrop for the SEC Revenge Tour in 2025. But we'll get to all of that in due time.
And to your point, if the scope of college football is shifting more towards defense and running the football, that is Big Ten football. And it was SEC football for a while, and the SEC kind of got away from it. And now it's more Big Ten. So we'll see if the SEC tries to play that big boy football again.
Iowa and Illinois, come on down.
They're ready. They're ready to take the next step. Nebraska is going to be great next year. It's going to be fantastic.
That's right. All right. Well, let's get out of here on that. For Trey Reeves, I'm Mitch Mason. Thanks so much for hanging out with us. Until next time, so long, everybody.
Gracious him. How about